The Pennsylvania Project and the Public Banking Institute present Public Banks for Public Works, Banking on the Commonwealth. This program was presented on October 18, 2014 at the Quaker Friends Center in Philadelphia, PA, as part of the East Coast National Symposium on Public Banks. This series of presentations covers several fundamentals of public banking, as well as related issues, factors, and opportunities. On stage in this video is a panel discussion entitled Building the New Economy, a Stakeholder Discussion, moderated by op-ed news editor Rob Call. The session is introduced by PBI and Pennsylvania Board Director Walt McCree.
We're about to wrap up this bigger conversation, and we want to get a little more focused on the opportunity of mission to be the driving, the definer of where our public banking initiatives go. Now, the mission of a private bank is pretty clear, and that is to create profits for the stockholders and the people who are in that company, and that's business as usual. That's good business. It's fine business, and produces a particular type of bottom line. The public banking opportunity provides a different conversation, and that is, and its mission is to do banking in the public interest, however that's defined. So how it's defined is one of the questions we had in the film this morning, is like, what is it going to be for Philadelphia? So we thought this part of the conversation and part of our time together would begin to give some examples of what this city could do, and or what any city could do if it had its own public bank. What would certain stakeholders want to do if they had the money? It's a bit of a blank check, and it's one of the reasons. This is, I think, once we get specific about the opportunity to fund the projects that are in our hearts and in our heads and on our drawing boards and in files on shelves from good studies that have never been realized because there hasn't been the money, because all that's been missing is the money. We can go there in our thinking, and we need to go there because it's going to help to drive what we do to make this real. All right, good. So we have, I think we have. No, this is. Okay. Okay. Well, you gonna join us?
I'm so sorry.
That's all right. Hey, man. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Good. So. This panel is going to be moderated by Rob Call. If you Google progressive news, Rob Call's op-ed news comes up as the lead. It is a compendium of a host of really fine writers from a cross-section of topics who delve into and report on things that you don't see in the mainstream media, which is a great deal of the stuff that's going on in the world. So, this is you see how it was talking about how abandoned cities are by the general interest of the state, and how we've been abandoned by other institutions, of banking institutions. We're really on our own. So Rob Call brings that conversation to our screens every day, and I invite you to check it out. He's also a radio show host, and he's a great guy and has some very important conversations to say about how the new economy is bubbling up. Rob Call.
Thanks. So, we have 4 community people who are going to be talking about different perspectives on how public banking can make a difference.
Thanks.
Thank you. Jamie Gauthier, did I say that right?
Yes.
Executive Director, Philadelphia Sustainable Business Network. Paul Glover, Green Jobs Philly, creator of Ithaca Hours. Curtis Gregory, Senior Director, City of Philadelphia Office of Business Services. And David Wu, Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance. If I've left anything out, when it's your turn to speak, please add additional information. I'm here to talk to you about a kind of a philosophical approach to public banking and where it fits into a bigger picture. I do a radio show called Bottom Up Radio because I believe we're transitioning from a more top-down culture to a more bottom-up culture. It's been facilitated and catalyzed by the internet, and it's the way humans existed for about 98% of their existence on the planet. We really were bottom-up when we lived in tribes and bands, and it wasn't until maybe 10, 12,000 years ago, it's estimated, when the first farming, domestication of animals, and the beginning of civilization developed. Bottom up. That's what we were. That's the way our brains evolved. That's the way our cultures worked. And then it started to change. And civilization has brought us some very interesting concepts and the ability to do some really neat things. The revolution that's coming back is happening in business. We look at the biggest business startups, or when they go public, they're bottom-up companies. Google and Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, they all work based on bottom-up concepts. So what is bottom-up? Bottom-up is caring, empathetic, local, small, egalitarian, grassroots, power with, compared to top-down, which is centralized, hierarchical, power over, non-empathetic, and uncaring. Now, I just started adding the non-empathetic and uncaring part of the top-down because I've done an extensive series of articles and interviews about psychopaths and sociopaths and narcissists. I've really come to believe that that's a big part of the problem. And how many of you have seen the movie The Corporation? It's something that's really worth seeing. It really takes the concept of psychopathy and applies it to corporations, and it shows how they're pretty much built to be psychopathic in functioning. So my goal today is to encourage you to look at relationships, systems, laws, solutions to problems in terms of how bottom-up they are. Top-down is absolutely necessary sometimes, but I'd like you to start thinking of bottom-up as a value system, as a way of seeing, well, that could be more bottom-up. That's too top-down. When you think of top-down, think of authoritarianism. And maybe think of a little bit of psychopathy and sociopathy, too. Actually, I said it's 10,000 years ago that civilization started, but really, most of the people on this planet still lived in bottom-up cultures 300 or 400 years ago. It's only in the last couple of hundred years that industrialization brought civilization to most of the world. It's a very recent thing. I'm not sure it's always a good thing. Maybe it's time for civilization 2.0. What does this have to do with public banking? Bottom-up approaches are the only way that change happens. Big changes. Think of Arab Spring. Think of Egypt. It looked really great at first, but it's a hard thing to do, to change something in a big way and a long way. I dug up a quote here. I gotta get out this quote for you. It's a quote from Buckminster Fuller that I think applies beautifully to public banking. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. That's really what we have to do. When we talk about going up against the powers that be, the top-down powers that exist, it's not going to happen. We cannot directly fight them. What we need to do is come up with alternative models, and that is what is insidiously happening with this bottom-up revolution. It's happened with Facebook and Twitter and all these internet companies. The internet is creating a generation of children, the millennials to start with, and you look at 3-year-olds now, they know how to go on an iPad and download an app. It's mind-boggling. I mean, I keep hearing this. I have a 3-month-old grandchild, so I haven't seen that yet. But the brains work differently. I've talked to a half a dozen neuroscientists who agree that the way the culture is shifting, young people's brains don't work the same if you're over 35 than if you're under 35. And it's a huge shift. Public banking is about as bottom up as you can get. As Harold Meyerson told me last night, he sees it as more of a means than an end. I agree. I see it as a means to disrupt the top-down financial, military-industrial complex power system. It gives us the power to peacefully set major revolutions in motion, kind of undermining from within. This is really powerful stuff that can change everything, and I think that public banking has the potential to do it better than just about anything else. How does it do it? It takes people's money away from top-down centralized financial interests and puts it in the hands of people. It saves all or most of the interest that's usually paid out and allows the people in cities, counties, states to use the money to serve the people instead of building wealth and equity for the elite and for corporations. As we've been told repeatedly, 40% of banks internationally are publicly owned. I'm sure that's one of the reasons that the U.S. is at the bottom of the ranking for commerce. Is Harold Meyerson still here? He wrote a piece this summer. There's one measure of commerce. The U.S. is 193rd out of 193 nations counted because we owe more money than just about anybody else. It's bad news. I really believe that when public banking happens, it will create a kind of an energy. There's a concept called morphogenic field theory, which is controversial, but it basically says if something gets out there in the world, then it is more likely to be repeated and reproduced. Public banking will allow more examples of bottom-up things to happen. Some of the things that it could lead to a wave of bottom-up changes happening include the reversal of privatization of the commons, elimination of big money in politics from billionaires and megacorporations, single-payer health care for all, relocalization of food, manufacturing, and jobs, decreasing authoritarianism in our culture, reducing centralized too-big-to-fail companies and corporations serving big government, an end to the implementation of the shock doctrine in the U.S., a diminishing of the power of big corporations and the 1%. And one of my personal favorites, debillionairizing America and ending American dynasties like the Waltons and the Kochs. Public banking is a bottom-up approach that does wondrous things for the bottom line, but it's only one aspect of the power of bottom-up. I encourage you to learn more about how bottom-up and top-down systems and elements of systems work, and to start envisioning a bottom-up future. To learn more about it, I've written a series of articles about it. You can go to them at opednews.com/bottomup. And I'd love to hear any questions from you when we get to the question and answer section. And I'm done. So, let's start from the bottom up. David Wu.
There's a microphone up there if you want it.
Do you want to sign for it? So good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Wu. I've been, I suppose, a patron of cooperative enterprises all my life, a member for most of my adult life, and an advocate for the last 20 seconds. No, I'm kidding. So, I have been a board member at Weaver's Way Food Cooperative here in Philadelphia for many years. Just a show of hands, how many, I'm gonna guess maybe about half of you, how many people are familiar with co-ops? Okay, oh, more than half. Very good then. Cooperative enterprise is an opportunity waiting to happen. In this particular city, there are now, within the city limits, 3 entities trying to start new food cooperatives. Kensington Food Cooperative, South Philly, and Manayunk and Roxborough. Currently, there are 2 that are active, Mariposa Food Cooperative and Weaver's Way Food Cooperative. Just as an idea of how big we are, Weaver's Way, we have about 5,200 household members or owners of the company, and we are about to reach $20 million in annual revenue with 2 full grocery stores in the northwest part of the city. Mariposa just recently expanded from 500 square feet to about 5,000 square feet. They're servicing well over 1,500 households, and they're probably close to about $5 million in annual revenue. And that's not counting the half a dozen other entities in the inner ring suburbs that are trying to start and have opened up. Doylestown opened up their food cooperative recently, a small operation, and Creekside in Elkins Park. So there's been a resurgence in food cooperatives across this country. There is a group called Food Cooperative Initiative, and they're trying to help folks get to the point without reaching failure. In every new business sector, there are those businesses that eventually fail. In co-ops so far, there have been failures, but there have been fewer. And and I figured I'd be preaching to the choir, and the goal here is to kind of reach out and maybe educate someone who's never heard anything about cooperatives. Familiar with the Rochdale Plan, where in 1844 a bunch of people and artisans decided to just fight the economic power. And in essence, what we believe, most of us, and I don't speak for everybody in every cooperative, believe that this public banking initiative has the opportunity for holding the economic totalitarians at bay. It's an opportunity to conserve wealth. The profits that are made at our food cooperative remain in our community. Our employees live in the community. Our salaries are roughly half of our revenues. So that's approximately $10 million that's remaining in the city when we did our expansion. Now imagine if there were more food cooperatives in the corner bodegas that were owned by the 500 families in that area. They're not going to be selling out very often because they've got to convince 51% of their shareholders to do so. So with the financing that's possible with the public bank, looking at cooperative enterprises, there could be much, much more stability in some of the local businesses that are there. And not only are cooperatives like Weaver's Way consumer-owned, there are worker-owned entities out there. Now, how hard would it be for a worker-owned entity to decide to move all their production to Mexico because the cost, they would be shooting themselves in the foot if they're the owners of that particular entity. So working hand in hand, this is an opportunity to get some benefit out of the finances within the city of Philadelphia, primarily because this is where the conference is originating from, but across this country, with the focus on cooperative enterprise, with the resurgence of credit unions, which, by the way, have been hobbied such by the banking lobby. I have a feeling that they may be kind of ancillary to some of this because of some of the rules that are there and being able to benefit from some of that municipal or state money that's available. It is an opportunity for us to gain back some of the control, because I've always believed that the economic power in this country has beget political power, and there's a lot of money that we are creating every day with the kinds of things and activities that we ourselves are doing that can be conserved without having it being shipped off to some far-off shareholder and maybe end up in our 403Bs or 501Ks. So there's something to be said about seeing this through. My goal is to communicate this to the cooperative enterprise world, to do what we can to get our members educated on this so that whatever political opportunities exist to make the laws different or to make the changes happen and to push this with the political will is what we intend to try to accomplish and support this particular initiative. But it's not going to end with this particular crowd. We all have an idea, and we're basically self-congratulating each other if we don't go out and bring in new audiences and bring in new people to give them an understanding of what this can possibly do. Thank you.
Curtis?
Wow, okay. Well, you know, it's one of those Saturdays where I had my notes all prepared in my office, and you know how one of those days where things just happen? I spent 3 o'clock in the morning last night in the emergency room with a 4-year-old as I was having an asthma attack, but I am very, very glad to be here right now, so I apologize for coming in late. As I said before, my name is Curtis Gregory. I'm responsible for the Office of Business Services. For those of you that have been around the city of Philadelphia for a long time, you might have known us as the Mayor's Business Action Team. We basically help business owners navigate the resources of the city. So everything from early stage businesses where they're trying to figure out the proper licensing or permitting to get started, to latter stage businesses that might want to grow organically or by acquisition. We help them with just about all that. But I don't think that's the reason I'm here today. My background is primarily commercial banking. I was recruited here by Wachovia as the Senior Vice President for Business Banking. And business banking at Wachovia was defined by companies with revenues of $5 million to $25 million. I don't know if I'd call that small business, but you get an idea of the background that I'm coming from. I've done everything from retail banking, managed 14 branches, managed a branch, various levels of commercial banking. And when I first heard about the concept of public banking, I kind of chuckled to myself and said, if I was still in banking, I don't know if I'd like this. And when I say banking, I'm really talking about the big banks, because that's the bulk of my experience. The PNCs, the Wells Fargos, the Bank of Americas, the Citibanks, you get the idea. What I saw take place in the 25 years, I know I look good for my age, don't I? Damn, that was cold. You guys, you know, that's a rough one. We'll just keep going. Was that if you look at the credit policy for any commercial bank, it probably hasn't changed in the last 20 years, quite frankly. It probably hasn't changed in the last 40 years. It's written for an industrial or manufacturing-based economy. The growth in this economy is in service, knowledge, professional service-based. That's the type of economy that we have right now. So the anxiety that we feel when we talk about access to capital is in that disconnect between what banks are comfortable with lending against and where the true growth is in our economy. The other thing I saw take place, when I was a branch manager and I was an assistant vice president, I thought I was pretty cool then. And they gave me loan authority of $3 million for secured deals and $1.5 million unsecured deals. That used to scare the daylights out of me, to be honest with you. So that means on my signature, I could approve up to $3 million. When I was a senior vice president, I could override up to $50,000. So I saw something take place in underwriting that has an impact on the public that I want to share with you real quickly. Now it's kind of score and go. It's basically math. The creative, the artistic, the subjective aspect of underwriting went away over time. And what essence happened is we created these things called loan processing centers. My team used to joke about them, call them loan prevention centers. Loans went in, but they didn't come back out again. And what was frustrating to me was the local aspect, or the brand aspect, or the goodwill aspect. We stopped talking about the people. Companies don't repay debt. People do. Let me say that again. Companies don't repay debt. People do. But in the context of commercial lending, that discussion was eliminated from the conversation. You were talking earlier, Rob, about empathy, and now I'm going to switch a little bit about my academic hat. I'm in the dissertation phase of my PhD in leadership and organizational change. And so I'm doing a lot of reading, and I'm not going to bore you with details, don't worry. I don't want to be one of those guys that never gets invited back to the parties because he starts talking about altruistic and egoistic behavior and blah, 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 blah. But anyway, when you look at the literature about emotional intelligence, when you look at the literature about transformational leadership style or servant leadership style, if you look at the literature about spiritual intelligence, the common theme that you see, or I should say one of the common themes that you see, is empathy. When you look at negative or destructive leadership behavior or narcissistic behavior, the one trait that's missing is empathy. When you look at how large commercial banks underwrite a deal or assess risk, empathy does not enter the equation. It's pure math. So until you get into the range of about 5 million to 10 million, 9 times out of 10, when you're talking about a large commercial bank, you're not even talking to the person that's going to make the decision on whether your company is going to get those funds. That person may not be in the same city. That person may not be in the same state. That person doesn't understand what the brand Pat's and Geno's means to Philadelphia, to illustrate it from a local perspective. So I'm really, really excited to be here today. I apologize again for being late, but I'm tickled to be up here as part of this panel.
Jamie?
Hi, I'm Jamie Gaudier. I'm the executive director of an organization called the Sustainable Business Network of Greater Philadelphia, or SBN. We are a nonprofit membership organization for locally owned businesses that operate on a triple bottom line. Our mission is to move towards an economy that is more just and sustainable, more empathetic, if you will, less sociopathic. That seems to be a driving theme. We have about 400 business members at this time. They really are all different types of businesses, everything from restaurants to construction companies to laundry businesses to service business-to-business companies like graphic design professionals and insurance brokers. So it's a very diverse community. And the way that we aim to create a different type of economy is by advancing businesses that care about more than just profit. So when I say that our businesses operate on a triple bottom line, that means people, profit, planet for short. So that means that they are undertaking practices and measuring themselves against metrics that are more than just financial. So it's things like paying a fair wage, offering benefits even to part-time workers, things like giving back to your surrounding community through donations or through volunteerism. It means acting in an environmentally responsible way, whether that's through the inputs that you're putting into your product or through taking care of the things, your waste in a responsible way. And beyond the fact that our businesses are sort of operating in a way that's very sustainable, they're all locally owned. So all of our businesses are owned by people that live in the Philadelphia region and can be responsive to the Philadelphia region. One thing that I really like about the concept of having a public bank is that it's triple bottom line in and of itself. And so it's creating a banking system that is responding to more than just the financial market and responding to more than just profit. It's creating a bank that will be responsive to what we, the people, think should happen in our community. So from that perspective, it really appeals to me. And so, so if we have this public banking system, we can decide how we want the money to be invested. So if we think locally owned business is a good thing, for example, like I do, then we can choose to support locally owned businesses. If we think that we want more businesses that operate on a triple bottom line and care about more than just financial profit, then we can choose to invest our money in that way. So from a mission perspective, it's very appealing to me and to a lot of the folks in my community. From a practical perspective, I also think it's very appealing. SBN is something that we hear from our businesses is that they really need capital. We did an exhaustive study a few years ago of not only the other thing I should say about our businesses, I meant to say this earlier, sorry. They're all small businesses. Because they're locally owned, because they're all privately held, they all are small businesses. So on average, they have 50 employees. They all have 50 employees or less. On average, they probably have between like 15 to 20. And so businesses at this size, in this region at least, have a hard time accessing the capital that they need at favorable rates. We did an exhaustive study called Taking Care of Business a few years ago that looked at not only the small businesses within our network, but the small businesses throughout the region. And so, and just to tell you something about Philadelphia in particular, 98% of the businesses here are small businesses, and they create the majority of the jobs. So they are the ones that are really sort of key to our economic success. But yet and still, they are not able to get what they need out of this region in terms of capital. And so from a very practical standpoint, even beyond mission, I think that public banking would be a very good thing for this city if we could use it to support the small businesses that are really foundational to our economy's health. And let's see, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I think it's a good thing based on mission. I think it would be awesome to not only have more triple bottom line businesses, but to have a banking system that operates on the triple bottom line and that is responsive to more than profit. And I think secondarily that it will really help to meet the needs of the small businesses. And so thank you very much. Happy to answer questions when we get to that part.
Paul Glover.
Hey, the economy should be fun. Economics should be fun. Economics should be dedicated to making life easy for everybody so that everyone has something useful and respectful to do, a basis for an income sufficient for a decent life. And what gets me up in the morning is that cities are full of beautiful children. And these children deserve cities as beautiful as they are. That, to me, should be the motive force behind economic development. Clearly, there are new paths for capital that are needed in order to move our economy and our culture in that direction. Currently, as everyone in this room knows, the economy and capital are dedicated to going the opposite direction, toward war and the destruction of the environment, toward increasing centralization in an insane process which destroys not only human life, but every other thing that is lovely and healthful upon the planet. So I'm very attracted to the notion of a state bank, the process of recapturing capital for these processes. And therefore, I think that a state bank in Philadelphia or any other city or throughout a city bank or a bank within this city, for this city, or through the state, needs to have a very specific agenda. And the agenda being, as I would see it, for passive solar construction, for urban agriculture, for free clinics, for massive and super insulation, for self-financing of insurance. And there's a big discussion as well. And for schools. Clearly, we need to make that agenda very explicit as we promote, or any agenda that we believe among us is imperative, as we promote a bank for Philadelphia or for the state as a whole. I've experimented in this direction over past decades. I created a bank, essentially, in Ithaca, New York, by going to my computer and designing paper money for my community. 23 years ago today, initiated Ithaca Hours, a local currency with colorful cash, pictures of children, waterfalls, and trolley cars, and convinced several thousand people in Ithaca, New York, and 500 businesses, including a bank, the hospital, movie theaters, bowling alleys, health club, restaurant, that it was real money, and millions of dollars of this cash money have transacted in Ithaca, New York since then. We've made loans up to $30,000 without charging interest, and grants to over 100 community organizations. Curiously, it was not illegal. We thought it was illegal, and I expected that would be part of the fun, because I'm a big fan of what I call underthrowing the government. I create nodes of parallel authority. Whatever is authoritative and normal and obeyed within our society, I like to disobey by creating its antipode. And so I started, in fact, a health co-op in Ithaca, New York. This is years before Obamacare, and I think still relevant for the success of a national health plan, a genuinely nonprofit health process, member-owned. $100 a year our members paid into this fund. And gradually, beginning with $300 in the bank on the first day, they were covered for 12 categories of common emergency anywhere in the world to specified maximum amounts. The state of New York came at us and said, "You can't do that." We said, "Go to hell." And by saying go to hell, we established, we had the political clout to assert effectively that people could pool small amounts of money to cover one another's health needs on a contractual basis. We defied state insurance law. And made law, therefore, by precedent. As was mentioned earlier, the right of jury trials and the stature of juries was established by the refusal of juries to capitulate to the commands of the king. And so all social change begins by creating a challenge to existing authority. So I've started more than a dozen such organizations over the decades that parallel whatever is authoritative and scare the people who have the authority and assert that there's a different direction. And sometimes what I start becomes absorbed into what is normal. But my intent is to establish that average people, all of us, have the capacity to very directly run the country, run our government, run our cities. I have submitted a plan and a grant proposal for starting a regional stock exchange, the Philadelphia Regional and Independent Stock Exchange, PRAIC, praise, and a word resonant in the churches of our city that would gather capital of all kinds for regional eco-development here. And that would be auxiliary to, compatible with, consonant with, connected to a city bank. The Philadelphia Fund for Ecological Living I am proposing, or the FEL or falafel, would gather tax-exempt donations to be targeted for the lowest income decile neighborhoods of our city to establish appropriate technologies, or metropolitan appropriate technologies, the solar and the whatever lowers the cost of living while cleaning the water and the air. And I published for 4 years in Ithaca, I'm sorry, I came from Ithaca. I published for 4 years in Philadelphia, Green Jobs Philly News, to about 8,000 people in Philadelphia, and I was astonished, as a relative newcomer here, the ferment, the grassroots ferment, the innovation. Every week, 1, 2, 3 new organizations dedicated to ecology and social justice in Philadelphia. What I see here is that these wonderful innovations are covered with, what's it say? 3, okay. Are layered over with an asphalt crust, about 8 inches thick, which is the government. With all respect to so many people who are in the government, who are dedicated and open-minded, innovative, and creative. The creativity I see at the grassroots level is so often stymied by councilmanic prerogative, by, I characterize it like this. It's like city council I see as like sumo wrestlers on a basketball court. They're like gigantic entities that just sort of block the shots. You got those little guys running around, innovating, saying, wow, enthusiastically, we could do this and this and this and this and this. But then councilmanic prerogative just starts to say, I signed a contract with Patch Adams, the clown doctor, to start the first Patch Adams free clinic. We have an option to buy a 5-acre vacant lot in North Philadelphia. build passive solar-free clinics, surround it with greenhouses and orchards. I started the Philly Orchard Project, POP, which has planted 36 orchards throughout the city of Philadelphia so far. I started that without knowing how to plant a tree, but I found the people who do. In fact, any of us is authorized to start anything we think is good. How do I get? 1 minute? All right. So anyhow, so Ithaca Hours, I think we need, and to sum it up, I think most broadly and most challenging, we need to move beyond the idea of the sacred middle class to what I call the mutual class. Since you have applauded, maybe I should leave it at that. I've written 6 books on grassroots economic development, and based on these experiments. We're all capable of taking initiative in any direction and building, without waiting for permission, the society we prefer to see.
So what you've had to say reminded me of a question that I've asked Ellen and a lot of the people who are involved in public banking, and that is, cui bono, who benefits? And what I want to ask you is, now you've each described in some ways how your constituents benefit. How can you take that to them so that we can go from 60 or 80 people here to tens of thousands that perhaps all of you combined represent?
I suspect the first step is education. I think I'm not someone who's an expert on public banking, so I'm still relatively new to the topic. But
there's a whole crew here who is willing to help.
Okay, yeah, but I suspect that there are many others that are like me. And so I was really compelled, especially by how public banks operate with like the local community banks to make loans to small businesses, for example. I think that many of the businesses within SBN would be attracted to that idea, but I think they have to know about it first. And so we will be sharing information that will help our banks to get on board with that. And so yes, I suspect that the education piece is first, both to the constituents that could benefit from public banking, like small businesses, but also I suspect that there's probably some level of education that needs to happen with the partners, potential partners of public banks, like the local community banks. And we're happy to be a part of that effort.
Well, so in essence, I think what we all have to do in this audience is to go back and enlarge the circle of influence. We have to include our politicians and our constituents. We have to make sure that they have a good understanding about this, so that when someone asks that question, at least you can kind of come back and be educated enough to be able to say, I know what you mean. This is what I think this is. I don't know if anybody's seen the thing that Jimmy Kimmel does when he brings one of his crews out and they ask somebody a question, and one of them was, gluten-free. Are you gluten-free? Yes, I am. Well, do you know what gluten is? I don't know what that is. And if we are all in a situation as advocates for this to be in a position where they're asked, well, what is public banking? Well, it's a bank where the bathrooms are free to the public, right? No, you've got to be able to have a succinct ability to have the credibility to answer those questions to the comfort of the individual or the gadfly asking that particular question, so that the general public has an indication these people who really believe in this know what they're doing. And this is a good thing, because I think the last thing we want is to have this to be viewed as I don't know, a conspiracy of some sort to take money away from the Waltons. We have to be able to figure out how to come across as
Speak for yourself.
As intelligent enough to be able to distinguish, fantasy from possible reality or practicality. I'm a practical utopian. That's why I'm a cooperator. I've thought that cooperative enterprise as an entity, would have opportunities that would be a little bit more fair and a little bit more, egalitarian and equal, which is the opportunity that presents itself with public banking. I mean, we're all subject to human nature here, and if everybody out there beyond this room was a perfect individual, it wouldn't matter what economic system we were operating under, be it communism, socialism, or capitalism. If we were all perfect people, all of them would work. But we've all seen failures for all of them. And the reason, and that linchpin where the failures have been, is because some of us are subject to you know, being power hungry, being petty, and being greedy. And we all have to admit that. And there has to be a way. And this is an opportunity. I'm not saying that public banking is a panacea, but it presents another opportunity with some more tools to be able to keep a cap on those of us, you know, who have, you know, greedy sociopathic tendencies.
You know, I think you hit on a key component. We talked about the corporation. Joel, I assume that movie's based on the book by Joel Bacon, The Corporation?
Exactly, yes.
The Pathological Pursuit of Power.
You can get it, you can watch it on YouTube, the whole movie's there.
And I did read the book as part of my coursework, and it blew me away when I read the book, when I saw how we have swung what I'll call the economic pendulum towards a intensely capitalistic society where social and cultural objectives just don't even exist anymore. And corporations spend a lot of money to get you to think they're like a person, feel like a person, but they're not. They're corporations. Although I think public banking is moving in the right direction, I don't know if it's a silver bullet. There's going to be a legislative aspect that has to take place to get that to happen. And if there's anything I've learned from being in government, and I've only been in government 5 years, I'm you know, part of the private sector. That's the world I come from. In the private sector, people got promoted, were given additional responsibility based on, maybe 80% is based on competency, 20% is, we gotta like you, we gotta feel good about you, we gotta interview and talk to you. In government, that's kind of flipped. 80% is, we like you, we feel good about you, and maybe 20% might be competency. I'm not saying that everybody in government's incompetent. That's not what I'm saying. Stop laughing. But what I am saying is I'm surprised at how many people in government that might rise to very senior leadership positions or might even be elected officials that don't have foundational skills for leadership or for management. And so when you present a concept like public banking, they may not get it. So what we have to do is focus on economic development from a business development perspective. What's in it for them? How do you benefit? How does your constituency benefit from this process, product, idea, concept, whatever the case may be? And I think that's what gets us there. I think too often we try to educate them with all the nuts and bolts of this thing and everything they need to know about it, where really what you need to do is be able to sit across the table from that person and say, this is what's in it for you. And I think that will move us in the right direction, but eventually there's going to be a legislative aspect to it, I think.
One more thing. I think if we're talking about implementing this here, whether it's in the city or at the state level, we'll have to find a way to separate the great public benefit that can come about through a public bank from politics. If people in the public perceive this as something that's going to be political, and that now we'll have like banks that are run by the council people that they see as like stymieing up, you know, sort of stopping progress, they won't support it. And so we have a tense political environment, not only at the city level, but at the state level as well. And so I think to get support, we'd have to make it clear that it won't be like this political, now we'll have like these political banks as opposed to banks.
Which is also, I want to add, I think a great way to democratize by cooperatives in place rather than centralize 1 or 2 or 3 shareholders for a company or sole proprietor calling all the shots. If more of the businesses were owned by more of the people, it in essence sort of dilutes that collection of power in one place.
You know, this morning, Harold Meyerson talked about how the last 2 Democratic presidents basically took people from the banking and finance industries to appoint to agencies. I don't think we want to do that. So I think we've got to really look at where business people, not politicians, but business people come and make sure that public banking brings in leadership that represents the values of public banking. I know Mike has talked about that. Where's Mike? Question in the audience. Okay.
Hi, my name is Clark King, and I wanted to put out there that I think we all have to be on the same page, and that means to a great degree identifying the crisis and its cause, the system of usury and speculation, especially with regard to financing and funding government, and then go on to propose a solution and list the particulars in how a formation of the economy can happen through the institution of a public bank. And so what I was looking for was a uniform communication. In other words, we're all communicating the same thing to whomever we're speaking to, especially to those in government, and to make it more understandable, more efficient in the communication itself, and easier to propose its immediate legislation. Because we are in a crisis, and it's not just a simple situation where we say we don't have any money and they have all the money. It's much worse than that. Our survival depends on getting this thing straightened out.
You had this question behind me.
Mary Bolton, DC Public Banking. I was just going to say that one of the things we've talked about in DC is that in terms of structuring the bank, public bank, that there be community input. In our city, we have 8 wards, which are geographic locales that are considered to be sort of little provinces. And the way around people sabotaging, hijacking, whatever the bank, community input. And in terms of their development needs in their own area, and how that would be structured is obviously dependent upon who structures it, but it could be structured in a way to prevent the bank being hijacked by politicians or a group of bankers or whomever. But I really think it's important that people realize that what we're trying to get people to buy into here, it's their money. It is their tax dollars, whether it's payroll taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, whatever. This is their cash. And people need to be involved and start thinking about how would they spend it to help themselves and their community achieve the goals that they need for a thriving community, frankly. It's not just, to me, public banking as opposed to commercial banking. It's our money. And we've been disenfranchised from that notion for a long time. We need to reconnect with it, I think.
We were talking about bottom-up development, and one of the things that has appealed to me is this mythical notion that there is a public bank somewhere in Brazil, I believe northeastern Brazil, that uses the same thing that participatory budgeting does in Chicago or New York City, where local people get to help set the loan priorities, not the specific loans. Those have to be made with due diligence by bankers. But if local people have input to say, hey, one thing we're not funding, we have all these service center programs or health programs. There's no shelter for battered women in our community. Or they might say, as we do in Boston, housing, affordable coverage. So far the public bank has done 10% of its loans for that. We needed to double that, just having input from the bottom up. So I would encourage us all, as we think about potential public bank governance structures, to try to find that bank in Brazil and learn how they do it, or talk to City Councilman Brad Lander in Brooklyn, or all kinds of people that use participatory budgeting to see if we can incorporate something like that. Just an idea.
Mr. Wu, way you hit a nerve. A big topic at alternative banking is worker self-directed enterprises. And the most popular one is in the north of Spain called Mondragon. And
very familiar with that.
1956 by Jose Maria Arizmendiarrieta,
Yes, Arizmendia.
which is hard to say. He is a Catholic priest who said, hey, we're not going to stick around for some capitalist to employ us. Let us make our own jobs. And they started with making washing machines. Then they went into other industries. I bring this up because they started a worker co-op bank called Caja Laboral. And Mr. Wachovia, can you imagine if you, your boss, and his boss can only make 6 times more than the lowest paid worker? Now how do you feel about raising the minimum wage? So this.
Oh, wait a minute. You call me Mr. Wachovia. I said I used to be a banker. You know, give me a little credit here. You know, don't turn me into some kind of guy with horns coming out here.
Did you pick up your luggage at the conveyor belt?
Yeah, I'm going to have to, I think.
Well, my point is worker co-op can work even with banking. And that is also an alternative. I'm not in that subcommittee, but they're looking into it with that. But my favorite worker co-op was started in the People's Republic of Brooklyn. It was by a bunch of women who were single that couldn't get work, and they had children. So they made a worker co-ops being nannies. So that's how they did it. They would watch other people's children. They would split the profits equally. And if I'm supposed to ask a question, do you think we can start a bank with a worker co-op system?
Well, that can start to get a little more complicated because credit unions are essentially financial cooperatives. In this particular country, there is a thing called field of membership. It's getting close to Halloween, I figured to throw that in, field of membership, where the banking lobby has essentially hobbled that sector by making it where not anybody can just walk into any credit union and put in a $5 deposit, become a voting owner of that particular credit union. So essentially, credit unions should be thought of as financial cooperatives in this particular country, but they cannot meet one of the first principles of cooperative enterprise, which is open and voluntary membership. And because of that, credit unions, not all of them have this Rochdale pioneer spirit in them from 1844. They don't have the International Cooperative Alliance's principles in place. They cannot meet that one because of the regulations. But there is possibilities for that kind of thing to happen. But again, in this room, probably pretty easy. It's how we appeal to the people out there and how we come across as a movement of cooperators and of public banking advocates so that it is not seen as something outlandish or crazy. This is very possible and it is very, very credible. It's going to depend upon the individual gifts of that particular demographic or that geography that can get it put together. You know, we have to learn, we have to teach each other, and then we have to repeat it. Because everything that happens here, if it never goes beyond this room, this was a pleasant meeting, wasn't it?
So a simple thing you can do, if you haven't done it, is share on Facebook and tweet and use the social media tools that you have access to and let everybody you know that you care about this and it could probably make it better for them.
And can I say, since you called me Mr. Wachovia, and I have friends at the parking authority, let me point that out to you before you leave here today. No, I'm kidding. No one has friends at the parking authority. The reason I wanted to be here is because even though I used to be a banker, I know exactly how they think. And I've had the luxury of working for large commercial banks in 3 different states, 3 different cities. So understand that this is America. And when a new process, idea, technology comes into play that might dilute my revenue stream, I'm going to use every resource available to me to fight you for that. So, as a former banker, as a former person from Wachovia, I'm sorry, I can't let it go now. We were raised to hate credit unions. We were taught Management Training Program 101. They're nonprofit organizations. Your tax dollars are going towards paying for your competitor. Do not go into credit unions. They're bad. They give away the bank. They're a bad service. But I mean, until I came to the city, I'd never banked with a credit union before, and I was blown away by the stuff they could do, because that mentality was there about anything different from a bank. We had the same mentality about S&L, savings and loans, and the list goes on and on. So understand, whenever you're talking about something new, the existing economy is going to resist anything that's a new economy.
I have to say, I got to know Wendell Potter. Any of you know who he is? Wendell Potter was the director of public relations for Cigna, and he was delegated by all the insurance companies to marginalize and attack the movie Sicko that Michael Moore produced. And he did it. But while he was in the process of doing it, he had an epiphany, and he realized that Michael Moore was right. And he became what I consider a whistleblower, testifying before Congress, writing a lot of articles, speaking all over the country on CNN and BBC about the problems, and becoming an advocate for Obamacare, for public health, for single payer. But the thing is, what he did first was he had a job, a high-paying, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year job with a staff aimed at attacking the concept of single payer when that was, and the whole idea that Michael Moore put out. And I'm telling you that because that is going to happen, because the banks have a lot more money than the healthcare system.
I just wanted to add one thing about credit unions. Someone who knows a lot more about credit unions than I sitting in this room, but credit unions can make their membership very inclusive. And again, it can vary by state, but I've worked advising credit unions who say if you live in a certain city, you could belong to a credit union. They can make their membership rules very inclusive as Weaver's Way, or more so. So I think credit unions are more constrained by the banking laws and what they're allowed to do,
Yeah, that's what I said.
not by how they bring their membership in. So it's really the way influence has been brought on creating laws that limit and hem in these kind of cooperative things. And that's where we come in, because we're the people who can help the legislator get a new idea and change the law. It is not written. Nothing is written. Whatever is the law can be changed for good or evil. And sometimes it's been not in a good direction. So maybe it's time for a turnaround. And I think that we are in an inflection point. There is a reason why Occupy happened. And Occupy happened because the banking cartel, the corporate cartel, I read the Times all the time, and it's almost obvious every day I'm reading articles about this centralization of power. It's time for change, and we have to create that.
Okay. Before we go to the next question, I say real quick, and I'll be brief, I promise. I just left a conference in Kansas City that consisted of all the people across the country to do exactly what I do. So this is on the vein of small business services. And one of the things we struggled with for this conference is government by design is transitional. So the guys that I knew from the conference last year from New York are gone because there's a new mayor. When they do the conference next year, I'm trying to bring it to Philadelphia, I may be gone because our mayor is in a transition year. We're going to be in a transition year next year. So the reason I bring it up to this group is I agree that we all have to it's going to get to some type of legislative thing, but you have to have an intensity and a sense of urgency, because before you know it, that person that you just sold on that idea may be gone.
Questions?
Hi, my name is Vanessa Lowe. Thank you. This is very helpful. I arrived a little late, but I'm particularly interested in hearing from Jamie and Curtis about essentially the what's in it for your constituency. It sounds like what I've picked up so far is that the campaign for this is still in the decision phase of what will this bank do. I've heard a wonderful thing about reducing the interest rates, for college debt. That sounds absolutely fantastic. And perhaps for your businesses, it will reduce the interest rate on their loans. But I've also heard sort of maybe a questioning or a possibility that it might do lending to individual businesses. What I've heard at least Jamie say, maybe you were also saying it, Curtis, was one of the challenges with small businesses is they can't get capital. It's really important before we go out and start sort of promising, that, oh yeah, you can go there and they'll get capital, is that we understand why those businesses aren't getting capital right now. I know that there's at least 2 community development financial institutions that do small business lending. So is it the challenge of they can't or don't want to do the business plan and detailed documentation that's required to get those loans right now? Or is it that it is available and they don't like the interest rate? So I'm just using that as an example of these are the kind of things we need to be absolutely clear on as to what this bank is going to offer and whether or not there's something in it for that constituency. So it's very helpful to hear the different people talk about what might be in it, but I'm very interested in also hearing about then how and what group is deciding on what is the bank going to be offering.
So in commercial banking, I'm held accountable to a 1% charge-off rate because I'm lending out consumers, my depositors money. What that means to you and I is I have to be right 99% of the time. If I have to be right 99% of the time, guess what type of risk I'm going to take on transactions?
Zero.
None. Very little. Because to quote Wesley Snipes, if I'm going to do it, you damn Skippy, you better be in line, So now in our economy, there's a gap between debt equity and what am I going to call it? Investment equity. If you talk to VCs, angels, they're not playing below 5 million, at least in Philadelphia. If you're in Ohio, it's about 2 or 3 million. That might have changed since I was there. And so there's a gap from about 3 million down to, what do you want to call it, $5,000, $10,000. There's nobody's doing that type of equity investments. So lending, when you talk to SBA, or I'm using Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation, which is PIDC. Every city, every state has some type of similar to SBA type secondary lending source that will guarantee part of the debt. There's usually a job creation component to it. Those products from those entities are still designed after a manufacturing and industrial-based economy. If you've got bricks and sticks, as we used to call them, if you've got accounts receivable, inventory, and equipment, it's an easy transaction to complete. This model gets beyond that because we're not necessarily lending out consumers, our depositors money. So you can go a little bit further out on the risk curve, similar to if those of you are familiar with CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions, they'll go up as high as 3 to 5% charge-off rates. That, to me, starts getting capital on the streets. Now, you mentioned about some of them won't do the business plan or they don't want to pay the higher interest rate. If you pound the pavement enough, you can find a loan. I can get you an asset-based lender. I can find a loan broker. Some people might call it predatory lending, depending on what circle you're in. You can find somebody to do the loan, but you may not be willing to go to that level of expense for the loan. And then some people, now this may sound really controversial, but some people should not get the loan. Y'all know who I'm talking about. You've seen them. So, but the public banking speaks to that in that 1% to 5% range, or those people that really want to do it, but they don't want to dig such a hole of debt equity that they'll never dig out of it, and they're smart enough to know better.
To answer your first point, or one of your points about selling the idea and promising something that might not happen. So I do think the agenda has to be set locally. So I guess we can't promise that we'll have more small business lending as a result. But it's been interesting to read about how it's played out in other places and how increased investment in that area well, it's how it's played out in North Dakota. And so I don't think it's a far-fetched thing to say or to sell. In terms of what we've been hearing from our businesses around their difficulty to access capital, I think it's for a number of reasons. So one, I think it's what Curtis mentioned around businesses not being able to find capital in a way that they're amenable to because of their type of business or because of the cost of the capital. I also think that here we've seen a gap in the amount at which you can take out a loan. So for instance, I believe that we saw the gap was somewhere between $75,000 and $250,000. So whereas a business can go to some of the business service organizations in the area and get a loan up to $50,000, if they're operating, if they need capital at less than $250,000, there weren't a lot of banks that were willing to do that. The city has addressed some of that. I think PIDC is offering a set of new products now that fill that gap. But to the extent that we have a public bank, it just increases the amount of money that we're able to put into those types of investments and endeavors.
I think one of the things that Curtis pointed out is the centralized algorithm that they use to evaluate companies applying for a loan. Other economists I've spoken to has said that centralized algorithms that were the basis for evaluating people or companies for credit were a key factor in the economic collapse that we had in 2008, 2009. What public banks do is it brings it back locally. That's been something that's been said over and over again this morning. Local, 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 and people. Who hasn't? We need to wrap. One last question, and it needs to be a question, not a comment, okay? All right. I don't think we've seen from you yet. The lady in...
This is a question for Jamie. In D.C., having the public bank be helpful to small business is one of our goals. And I was interested in you saying you had the study taking care of business. I'm wondering if that's available, and also how did you get it financed?
It is available. It's available on our website, sbnphiladelphia.org. I can also send it to you if you have trouble downloading. We were financed by the William Penn Foundation to do that study a couple of years ago. Since then, the foundation no longer sort of funds that type of work, but we were fortunate to be able to get a grant some years back. And we're still, and it's been invaluable. We're still driving that work forward, and it's the only study of its kind, so other people approach us to help inform what they're doing. Could you just get the website one more? Yes, sure. sbnphiladelphia.org.
Last thing, why don't each of you give your websites so that people can know how to find out more about what you do?
And paulglover.org. That's like Paul, Ron Paul, or Glover as in Danny Glover. .org. Cover the bases.
Any website with a .coop, top domain. But here in Philadelphia, we've just gotten a new organization called the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance, a new executive director funded for the first year by the National Cooperative Business Association. You just Google anything with a .coop and you can learn a lot about co-ops.
So our website is www.phila.gov/business, and you'll reach our business services portal. I should tell you, Jamie's report is, I'm not publicly allowed to say it's fantastic because it kind of jammed our administration a little bit, but she talked good about my particular department, said we should increase staff there, so I kind of like that report. Yeah. So.
And again, it's opednews.com. And if you're interested in psychopaths, it's opednews.com/psychopaths. There's about 50 articles and transcripts there.
You're really starting to scare me now, you know.
The more you find out about them, the scarier they get. Thank you.
Thanks to the panel. Curtis Gregory, Jamie Gauthier, Paul Glover, David Wu. and Robert Call. Rob Call. Good to see you.
Thank you for joining us for this presentation from the East Coast Public Banking Symposium, Public Banks for Public Works, Banking on the Commonwealth, held in Philadelphia's historic Friends Center Meeting House. For more information about public banking and the movement to create a national network of new public interest banks, visit the Pennsylvania Project at publicbankingpa.org. Or to learn about the national project and access a variety of educational information on the topic and developments in the field, visit the Public Banking Institute at publicbankinginstitute.org.